respectful to everybody's time, so we'll go ahead and get started this morning. Thrilled to have you all joining us this morning to share what we know and we've learned about the new DFARS interim final rule that came out just at the end of September that amends the current DFARS clause 252.204-7012, which of course is focused on safeguarding covered defense information and cyber incident reporting. I'm Elizabeth Niedringhaus, President and CEO of SSE. Again, thrilled to be with you this morning. I am joined today by Greg and Charlie. Wanted to give them both a moment to introduce themselves. Greg, good morning.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. My name is Greg Thornton. I am the Vice President of Network and Security Services at SSE. Ultimately, I reside over the daily operations and service delivery for our clients. And for the better part of the last year, worked side by side with Charlie and a few others from our team to better understand the approaching CMMC requirements and have a solution developed to implement for new clients. Thank you.
All right, super. Thank you, Greg. Charlie, good morning.
Good morning. My name is Charlie Shudo. I am VP of Technology and Security here at SSE. Been with SSE for about 12 years now. When I first came on, I was leading research and development for SSE, as well as heading up cybersecurity on a technical level for CMMC, NIST 800-171, and then for 800-53, which we're using in our internal classified systems that we manage for our prime customer. Thanks.
All right, great. Thank you both. So just a little bit of background for those of you that might not be familiar with SSE. SSE was actually founded back in 1966 by Susan Elliott. She was really determined in 1983 to get in on the ground floor of the PC. And of course, at that time, nobody knew how to use computers. So SSE started as a training services company, but quickly evolved into IT services as many of the companies that attended the training quickly turned to SSE when they were ready to roll out computers and set up networks across their companies. They turned to SSE for IT services. Actually, back in 2009 that we began to develop our cybersecurity expertise when we took on classified programs for our prime customer, as Charlie mentioned. So today we're focused in the financial services and defense sector, primarily driven, of course, by our cybersecurity expertise and serving those markets. And we believe really the foundation that allows us to provide these types of solutions is our quality management system. We are ISO 9001-2015 certified. And again, it's these quality processes that we believe allow us to consistently deliver compliance solutions to our customers, both in the defense and financial services sector. So just a little bit more information. So why SSE when you think of cybersecurity and the topic we're presenting on today? I think it's really a unique combination of four of our capabilities. Of course, the cybersecurity expertise, as Charlie mentioned, managing the classified data, of which these cybersecurity requirements are just a fraction of, but combined with the fact that we're a defense contractor ourselves. So we have walked in your shoes, continue to walk in your shoes over the last 16 years. And we also have a commercial IT managed service practice. As I mentioned, many of the companies that turned to SSE in the early years for IT services, we've continued to develop those services with an IT managed service offering today for small and mid-sized businesses across the United States. And again, I mentioned our mature processes that allow us to provide quality service in our delivery. So our agenda for today is, one, I'll give you a little bit of background on the DFARS interim final rule, what led us to this point, and then I'll walk through the interim final rule, talking about who's affected, what specifically changed from the current DFARS clause, and what those new requirements are. I'll share with you what SSE's solution looks like to getting to compliance, and then step by step, the steps you can take to get to compliance. We hope that there will be time at the end to answer folks' questions. You will note at the bottom of your screen, you will see a folder, a file folder with a Q on it. Please don't wait till the end to ask your questions. As I'm going through the presentation, please enter your questions in. We'll answer them as we go. If not, we'll save a couple for the end and share those with the group at the end of the presentation. We want to make this as interactive as possible, so please do ask your questions. So again, as I mentioned, we wanted to start with some background, and the place where I feel like it's most appropriate to get started is actually to rewind the clock to about a year and a half ago. And there was a report from an audit that was conducted by the DoD Inspector General of IT systems of contractors in the defense industrial base, specifically looking at their protection of controlled unclassified information. That audit found that contractors did not consistently implement the mandated requirements under the DFARS Clause 252.204-7012. Following that up, of course, so in November of this past year, a statement came out from the Undersecretary of Defense, a strong statement. They went even further and said they believe only 1% of the defense industrial base companies have actually implemented all 110 controls required of the NIST 800-171 standard, which is driven by DFARS 252.204-7012. If you think about that, just 1% has fully implemented what was required by the present DFARS clause. So no surprise where we are today and this new interim final rule. Just to take a quick step back before I move forward and let you know again what has led up to this. So it was actually back in 2014 under the Obama administration that an executive order came out, and DFARS 252.204-7012 mandated compliance to the NIST 800-171 standard. Again, 110 cybersecurity controls. That executive order in the DFARS clause required that all contractors by December 31st, 2017. So a full 3 years to get into compliance. So again, if just in last year, the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense believes that only 1% of the defense industrial base is compliant, again, no surprise that this interim final rule came out just, again, a month ago. And it amends 252.204-7012, the current requirement. The interim final rule will be effective just a month from today, so November 30th, 2020. And what's interesting to note is the interim final rule actually pushes out 3 new DFARS requirements under really a two-pronged approach. The first 2 DFARS clauses, 7019 and 7020, actually put more teeth behind the NIST 800-171 requirements with a DoD-defined assessment methodology that every contractor must complete. And I'll get into more of that throughout the presentation. And these first 2 DFARS clauses are a bridge to 7021, which requires the CMMC the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification that you likely have heard about. That is the DFARS clause that mandates requirements to the CMMC standards and certification. So in a way, 7019 and 7020 are the bridge that the government needed in order to get to CMMC. So who is affected? All DoD contractors and subcontractors. The only exclusions noted are contracts for commercial off-the-shelf products. You will note here the DoD has estimated that the 5 NAICS codes most impacted by this interim final rule are the following 5 listed here. Already compliant? Well, the government clearly believes you should be. So what's interesting to note with this interim final rule is that when they conducted their impact analysis and the costs associated with this interim final rule, they did not include the costs associated with compliance to NIST 800-171. The reason, and it's highlighted in black here, is that contractors should already have implemented these cybersecurity requirements. Therefore, those costs are not attributed to this rule. This really gives you the mindset of the DoD and how they view this, that, again, contractors should already be compliant. So here is the interim final rule, bit of an eye chart, but I wanted a way to concisely compare the DFARS clauses and share with you the differences between them. So you'll note on the left, we have 7012 and then the 3 new DFARS requirements. I'm actually going to walk through each one, so you'll need to try to digest it all on this slide. But I'll walk through in these coming slides for each one. Who is required to do what, when it's required, how it's required, again, where it's required, and how often. But you'll note the orange square under the existing DFARS clause 7012, and that is really the driver for the next 3 DFARS clauses. The fact that there was no way other than the honor system by contractors to self-attest is what's driving these new DFARS clauses. There had to be a measurable way to make sure that contractors are complying. So again, what was the problem with 7012? Well, clearly it was unenforceable. There was no way to enforce contractors to be compliant. And so therefore, contractors are allowed to continue to process and store and transmit controlled unclassified information without having the proper safeguards and controls in place. So looking at the 2 new DFARS clauses, 7019 and 7020, again, these are the 2 that are focused on that same NIST 800-171 standard, but they're a little bit different. The first, 7019, and again, both of these could come out on any new contract, subcontract, a task order under an existing contract, or a delivery order. And you must show in 7019 compliance prior to contract award. As opposed to self-attestation in 7012, this requires a self-assessment to be completed. The self-assessment, and I'll get into the methodology program that the DoD has defined, requires that you, again, assess yourself against all 110 controls. You are allowed to have unfinished business, so POAM items that are documented, but you must have a date that all requirements are expected to be completed. And the big difference is Now, as opposed to self-attestation, there is a website noted here in the middle of the slide that is the Supplier Performance Risk System. The requirement is all contractors, again, self-score and enter their information into this website so that all contracting officers and prime contractors have access to all contractors' scores. Again, it is required every 3 years to complete this self-assessment. DFARS 7020 is a little different. It actually is the clause that allows the DoD themselves to come in and assess a contractor's compliance. So getting in and looking at the physical controls, the IT systems, to verify what the self-assessment that the contractor completed says, and to verify for them, the DoD to verify for themselves. It's envisioned this will only be done for medium and high risk programs. But again, it is a DFARS clause that allows the government to come in and verify a contractor's self-assessment. The other piece that it requires is that all contractors ensure subcontractors have assessment scores posted prior to award of a subcontract. This is again how the DoD will make sure that the NIST 800-171 standard is flowed out through the supply chain. Again, the focus on NIST here is putting the teeth behind the NIST 800-171 controls that didn't exist under 7012, but is also the bridge to the new standard that the government's been talking about, the CMMC standard. Okay, so what does this assessment methodology look like? Well, first of all, it's an objective assessment. So it's set up with a weighted assessment methodology for all 110 controls. Some are worth 1 point, some are worth 3 points, and some are worth 5 points. Ultimately, the score that you get reflects the net effect of security requirements that you have not yet implemented. So a perfect score is 110, meaning that you have implemented all 110 controls. So for each requirement not met, you must subtract the value of that control and the points assigned to it from your perfect score of 110. So again, since that's a little confusing, taking it one step deeper, here's what the assessment methodology looks like. For example, you have the NIST controls on the left, the security requirement required, the value associated with that, and then how you comply. There are 42 of the 110 controls that are worth 5 points. There are 14 that are worth 3 points, and 54 that are worth 1 point. Again, a perfect score is 110, but clearly it is possible to have a negative score. I don't think it's good, but it is possible to have a negative score. So that drives us again. So 7019, 7020, the bridge to this new standard, the CMMC program that the government's been talking about. And it allows the government, again, to shift towards this program with all contracts it is anticipating, including this CMMC clause, by October 1st, 2025. They're starting to roll them out this year. It's anticipated that at least 15 to 20 contracts will be released with the CMMC requirement. It will be required that prior to contract award. And the difference here is that CMMC, and this is the big driver, right? So 7019 still is not totally objective in the sense that the contractor is self-assessing. And 70/20 is somewhat limited. The DoD only has so many resources to go in and verify a contractor's self-assessment. So the CMMC program sets up a process by which third-party organizations will come in and assess an organization's compliance to the CMMC standard. The good news is the CMMC standard includes all 110 controls required by NIST. So again, hence the bridge from NIST to CMMC. There are an additional 20 controls, or they're called practices under CMMC. But again, getting compliant to NIST 800-171 will take you a long way to being ready for a third-party organization coming in and assessing, actually auditing your environment and providing a score, again, that will be included in the SPRS database. It will be required that all contractors have an outside, again, a third-party audit every 3 years. So I've mentioned this several times. I'm feeling like a broken record here, but again, what does it look like from NIST to CMMC? Again, the fact that those 7019 and 7020 are really a bridge to CMMC. Here's a chart that shows you, again, there are various levels of CMMC compliance. It's a vision that most companies in the defense industrial base will be required to certify to level 3, although all companies will be required at least to meet level 1. Now, if you look at the middle of the screen, the orange arrow in the middle, you will see the NIST 800-171 controls. And you will note that at level 3, all NIST 800, all 110 of the controls must be met to satisfy CMMC level 3. And then you will note over here on the right, 20 additional. So again, if you are compliant to NIST, you are a long way towards compliance to CMMC. So you may be asking yourself, what does CMMC compliance look like in terms of people, policy, IT? Here's a quick graphic that we put together to answer that question. You'll note in the dark gray color, anything that is satisfied with a policy or a procedure is in dark gray. Again, we've mapped these out against the CMMC domains across the top, and then each of the 130 controls. You'll notice in orange, all of those controls are satisfied with technical configurations of your environment or group policies in your Active Directory in your network system. So how information is managed. For example, do you require password complexity, or how often you are required to change your password. The third bucket is IT tools. What are the controls that are met with IT tools? So antivirus, backup and disaster recovery, mobile device management. Again, 15 different systems are actually required to meet these controls. So what is SSE's solution set? How can we help you get to compliance? Well, SSE has fully vetted 15 tools in what we call our tech stack. Those tools have been tried and true and tested in our own environment, but also all of our clients to date that verify that these tools work and can be audited for compliance. We have 20 GPOs defined that we can implement in your environment that, again, meet the requirements and the controls. And we have developed 15 customizable policy templates for your organization. These policy templates map back to our GPOs and tech stacks, but have very clearly defined spaces in them for you to customize them to your particular environment. You may wonder why I have the number 57 there. It's because not only do we have 16 policy templates, there are actually 41 supporting documents to those policies that are necessary in order to meet compliance. So when you take the 15 tools in the tech stack, plus the 20 GPOs and the 57 policy templates, you get them all from one partner. We believe we're the easy button moving forward for compliance. So again, back to the CMMC domains, our tech stack, you will see here the 15 different kinds of tools that are required in order to be compliant and how they map out across the CMMC domains. Note that if you do not have these systems, it will be a 90-point deduction from the weighted score that's required for 7019 and 7020. Next, you'll see where the group policy objects that we've defined, again, map out across the CMMC domain. And it's interesting to note in this case, the IT tools plus the GPOs that we've defined, without these, you would need to take a 152-point deduction from your weighted assessment score. And finally, you know the 16 policies and the 41 supporting documents and how those map in against the domains, the CMMC domains. Our question really to all of you is, how will you measure up? So if you're wondering that, we have a 4-step plan you can follow to compliance. The first step would really be a readiness assessment. This would be a high-level look that we could take at your environment based on determining what CMMC level you will be required to comply to, as well as the NIST 800-171 controls, reviewing your system security plan you have in place and any POEM items, and really to try to define a roadmap for you to compliance. So resources, budget, timeline, rough high-level order of magnitude, what's it going to take and when to get from where you are today to a compliant state. Step 2 would be then a deeper dive into your environment and conducting a full-blown gap analysis. So really diving into your existing policies and procedures, reviewing your IT environment, reviewing your physical security practices, and basically determining where the gaps exist against the current standard, NIST 800-171 and CMMC. The output of a gap analysis would be a security assessment report with POEM items. Please note this would go a long way to helping a company complete the weighted assessment score required by 7019 and 7020. Step 3 would be actually to remediate the environment, to go in and implement systems, tools, policies that are required in order to address all of the gaps found in the gap analysis. So again, documenting all of the policies and procedures, leveraging our model policy templates if required, customizing those, of course, to your environment, implementing the tools in our tech stack as well as the GPOs, implementing any other IT systems that would be required to be upgraded, outdated hardware or software, for example. And the net result of the remediation should be a final system security plan. Finally, We know that IT systems don't just get put in place and run forever, that they require ongoing monitoring and remediation. So we have a package for those 15 tools and our 20 GPOs. Our monitoring service will allow us to continually monitor and remediate those IT tools and GPOs in order to make sure that the evidence and reporting is there in order to get through an audit. Many small and mid-sized companies in the supply chain do not have the IT staff nor the time to monitor and remediate all of these tools and the GPOs that will be necessary in order to collect the evidence and be ready for an audit on an ongoing basis. That's where our cybersecurity as a service can uniquely help those companies not only get compliant, but stay compliant. So I have a quick polling question, and it's two-part here. Given the interim final rule issued recently, do you believe that your organization is prepared to handle compliance internally? If no, what components of compliance would you consider outsourcing? And there's several choices there. We'll give you a few moments to respond, and we'll share the results with all of you in just a moment as soon as you have a chance to complete the polling question.
So we've had about 25% of the folks vote, so we'll keep it open for about 10 more seconds if you'd like to get in your vote.
Okay, great. Thank you, Vince. All right, super, thank you. Well, interestingly enough, those of you, about 70% said they're either unsure or know that they would not be able to be prepared to handle compliance internally. Well, it's a good thing you're on the webinar today, and that's generally what we're finding when we talk to most companies, that there's a fairly high degree of uncertainty in terms of their ability to handle all of this internally. Also interesting to note that about 80% of you said they'd outsource some piece of this, whether it's the gap analysis and remediation or actually all three pieces of it, the gap analysis, remediation, and ongoing compliance. The readiness assessment we're finding and working with companies is a great first step to really get their arms around what a gap analysis and remediation might look like moving forward, and is a key piece to probably getting peace of mind as a business owner that you actually have a plan for how you'll move forward. Okay, so just getting ready to wrap up here in a moment. I guess I just want to underscore the criticality of compliance. Obviously, we all know that it could represent significant lost revenue or through the inability to secure new and additional contracts. But what was super interesting to me is the cover of last month's publication of the Procurement Lawyer, which is a publication by the American Bar Association. They came out and said very clearly that the government will pursue civil and criminal penalties. So signing a government contract and each subsequent billing can act as self-certification of compliance to all DFARS requirements on that contract. And it was noted in the article that they anticipate the courts will continue to find civil False Claims Act violation for not complying to these cybersecurity requirements, which again, the government believes all contractors should currently be compliant with, given the fact that the DFARS clause initially came out in 2014. So with that in mind, we want to open it up here to questions and answers. I think I've seen some questions come in as I've been speaking. I'll turn it over to you, Bob.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Yes, we do have some questions throughout that Greg and Charlie have been answering, as well as a couple more that we haven't got to. Before I read those, I'm going to turn it over to Charlie Shudo, because we did get a couple of questions, follow-ups on the DoD self-assessment scoring methodology. Charlie, would you mind just level setting for the group on that one, a little more detail?
Definitely, because it is quite confusing. So that perfect score of 110, there are 110 controls. Think of it as you can only get 1 point if you get it right, but you can get more than 1 point taken off if you're wrong. So if you are completely compliant with all 110 controls, the max you can get is 110. But if you don't have multi-factor authentication in place, you can get 5 points taken off for that. But you can only get 1 point if you do have it implemented. Again, it is confusing, but I'm hoping that explains it a little bit more, because there were multiple questions on that one.
Thank you, Charlie. Greg, I'm going to give this question to you. What would it cost my company to purchase all of the IT tools needed to meet NIST 800, 171, and CMMC requirements?
So that it's a slightly more complex answer than how much the software would cost, but the software itself, you'd look at a rough estimate of $50,000 on an annual basis, though you'd have to additionally consider that you'd need someone to install, manage, and monitor the software, and you'd have to incorporate what your hardware is, the current state of your hardware, if it's current, if it's old, running 2003, XP, Windows 7, as well as your processes that you've got engaged within your company. So we could help with any closer estimate if anybody would like to have a slightly more in-depth conversation.
Thank you, Greg. Charlie, I'm going to turn this question over to you. If I have an external IT provider, do they also have to be CMMC compliant?
Yes, they would be. So since they will be supporting your systems, they essentially become part of your supply chain. So the big thing here is they would or could have administrative access to your systems, meaning they could give themselves potential access to CUI or FCI.
Thank you, Charlie. Another question for Greg. Greg, because this would be your team, how long would it take to have a gap assessment done?
So from start to finish, our gap assessment is assumed to be about a 3-week process that's based on one domain. Additional domains, in other words, additional boundaries would have a cause for slightly more time. But again, we could discuss that in greater depth with the specifics of the organization we'd be looking at.
Thank you, Greg. Looks like we have one more question that hasn't been answered yet. And it is, what is the impact of using more and more cloud services, i.e. Microsoft Office 365, SharePoint Online, etc.? I don't know if you or Charlie want to speak to that one.
I'll take this one. Really, if we're talking about compliance with DFARS, you have to meet ITAR compliance, and when doing that, you can't just use the normal commercial version of Office 365 or any other cloud-based products. So what you're looking for is export control language in the terms and conditions. You're looking at support of users that at least are carrying a green card, mostly U.S. citizens. Obviously, the data can't leave the U.S. So you're looking at, for instance, instead of Azure or AWS, you're looking at AWS GovCloud or Azure Government. So it does kind of close down the reins on some of the cloud products that you can use or are used to using. For instance, we had a great backup provider that we loved and used for many years. but because they couldn't meet ITAR compliance within their cloud, we had to move to a different provider. So this is something to think about. Thanks.
Thank you, Charlie. I believe that last question was just answered.
Yeah, there's a couple questions coming in on the same topic, if I may jump in, Bob.
Sure.
Impact of other organizations that have access to your data or multiple softwares. So as Charlie just discussed, the software involved has to be ITAR compliant. I lost my place. Bear with me one second. So anywhere the data flows, then the compliance level would have to be met by any organization that can touch that data. So as I discussed in the question and answer session, an HVAC contractor would not need to be compliant with CMMC level 3, even if your company is. They would, however, need escorted through the building, and you'd want to minimize the inadvertent contact. But for instance, a managed service provider such as ourselves, where we are pushing patches and we have access to your systems, we would need to be compliant at the same level that you are.
And then I'll take that last question. There was a final question that came in about the CMMC certification audit. I just went through the registered practitioner training last week, so it's real fresh in my memory. So obviously a C3PAO is going to be the body that's going to come in and do the actual certification exam. General cost, from what I read in the training, the cost is not going to be set by the CMMC-AB. It's going to be set by the individual organization that you reach out to. Through the provisional assessments, those are going to be handled. The CMMC-AB is going to direct you to a C3PAO to do those assessments. But once we're past the provisional period, then you can go to the marketplace at the CMMC-AB, be able to choose your C3PAOs and get individual quotes for them. So I have no idea on cost is the long answer, or the short answer, I should say.
I'll hop in a little. What we've read, but again, who knows? It hasn't happened yet. Is something in the neighborhood of about $20,000 to $40,000 for a level 3 type audit. But again, to Charlie's point, there will be a marketplace, and I'm sure it will be competitive.
Thank you, everyone. I believe that is all of the questions. I would just like to add that a recording of this webinar will be sent out to all registrants and attendees. And please look for that email later today or first thing tomorrow. And with that, Elizabeth, I will turn it back over to you. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you all for the great Q&A. Thrilled that people were able to get their questions answered. And in that vein, we'd love to continue to be a resource for all of you on the call today. Any questions that you have, I have Bob's direct dial at the office noted here, as well as his email address. Please, no question's a dumb question. We'd love to be a resource for you all. Please reach out, ask questions, and we just thank you very much for your time and attendance this morning, and look forward to being in touch. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day.